Hey everyone, welcome to Snowpal's Software Development and Architecture podcast. Today we have a special guest with us. We have Dr. Deva Rangarajan. I'm going to call him Deva since I know Deva for many years now. Deva is a professor of sales at IEACG School of Management, France. We've had a prior conversation with Deva. Definitely check that out. And we're going to kind of pick up from where we left off. Again, Deva, thanks for taking time. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Just to, it was a week or maybe a couple of weeks. So just to jog your memory and audience's memory as well, we talked a number of things about sales at a
Uh,
higher level. We sort of scratched the surface and we're going to pick
mm,
up from where we left off. And for today's conversation, I have not, again, folks, I have not shared the topic with Deva. It's going to be a surprise. He's going to learn it at the same time that you're going to learn it as well. Um, the topic is going to be prospecting, right? So
mm,
today, my hope is we can just focus our next 1 hour or
uh,
so on prospecting and several facets of prospecting. Now, one of the things, just to say where we left off in the last podcast, you had explained to us a number of things, and one of the last things you
mm,
told us was the subjectivity that is involved in sales as an industry, right? As
mm,
something that you do. There's a large element of subjectivity, and I was trying to tell you how, as engineers, we try to quantify it, why it doesn't always work well. That's kind of where
mm.
the conversation ended.
Yeah.
Today's conversation, I want to pick up with prospecting. And to kick this off, I also want to say that I'm going to try to draw some of this up so we can kind of record what Deva is actually sharing with us, folks. That way, when I publish the podcast, I include the video and also the actual artifacts that we end up creating during the podcast. And we'll make adjustments as we go.
Mm,
The first thing, Deva, when
mm,
we talk sales prospecting,
mm.
let's say 101 of prospecting, just
Mm.
concentrating on that item, how would you sort of kick off that conversation?
Well, Krish, it's a very, very interesting topic, this idea of prospecting, right? Because prospecting about what is happening now is quite different from prospecting that used to happen much before we had all these new technologies come up and stuff like that as well, right? So in the past, when I began my career in sales, it was like prospecting was the internet was just one of those things which was there, but it's only commercially becoming available at that point in time. There was no idea of websites or things like that. They were just picking up. And at that time, prospecting was either you would go into your database of existing customers that you had, or people who had asked you for some information, had called you for something, and then you're going to call them back, or you would buy a list of potential customers and you would do cold calling. And the cold calling would be either you pick up the phone and call them. The risk of people actually answering it is pretty slim. The other thing you would do, of course, is that you would actually go in and literally go. Let's say, for example, you would be on route to one of your customers, and on the way you say, "Wait, that's an interesting company that was there on my list." So essentially, you would have these kind of routing and stuff like that that goes into saying, "Okay, we're going to do it. Just go in, talk to the folks out there, try to get an appointment right there, and talk to them." Of course, what happened after that, of course, is 2006 came, and then of course you had the cloud coming up, and then but by that time also you had more and more companies looking at websites. But 2006 and pretty much when cloud came in, and suddenly then after that it was followed by what happened with the 2008 financial crisis, where suddenly now the client said, "Wait a minute, I'm not just going to trust my supplier to do the right thing. I'm going to do my homework before." So now a combination of a financial crisis along with technological evolution meant that suddenly now your customers want to take more control of essentially who they want to talk to as well. So essentially, then you see these kind of prospecting slowly moving into the realm of digital marketing, coming up with, hey, how can we prospect for customers? But actually, when the customer is saying they want to be more proactive, they want to take control, they're not going to wait for the salesperson to come around. So suddenly you saw marketing play a much bigger role in terms of generating leads, prospecting for clients, and we would hear terms like inbound and outbound. And the earliest I've heard about that was through companies like HubSpot, where they came up with this idea of marketing automation and stuff like that, where you would actually have these kind of marketing operations people going out there trying to come up with campaigns inbound. That is essentially with your website or your blogs. Social media was also picking up. So essentially, you see all those as a way of creating awareness, but you didn't necessarily control who would have access to your content and who would come over either to your website to ask for questions or use the contact details from your website to reach out to you as well. So prospecting was also changing it from really cold calling to a lot more marketing driven prospecting. Again, this would vary industry by industry, but since your audience is predominantly people in the tech space, this idea of using technology and digital technologies, digital marketing technologies to look at inbound was something that is increasingly happening. And if you have to take a look at numbers by Gartner and all those, and Gartner and Serious Decisions, you had these numbers like 57% of a customer's buying process and the decision process is made before they talk to a sales rep would mean that the customers are taking control. So what prospecting? You're mostly talking about the customers from more or less calling you in when they think they know what they want. So prospecting has changed significantly. COVID also changed things as well. So prospecting for me today, depending upon the industry that you're in, and if you happen to be very specifically in the tech space, essentially marketing does some of the initial prospecting for you. That prospecting can be when you proactively do your email campaigning, say, I want to have a list of potential customers and go after them. Or you would say, I'm going to have a fantastic kick-ass website, or I might have great social media posts, or I might actually have blogs or influencers talk about us, or use customer testimonials. And then we still do not know. It's almost like, okay, we're going to do this. We do not know who's going to come and be interested, right? So you don't control that. It's like advertising, right? So you're going to have the Super Bowl coming up soon. So essentially, Super Bowl is where you pay a lot of money. Companies pay a lot of money to get advertising spots. And then, of course, but you do not know which customers you're going to attract. Same thing with any of these inbound techniques. Inbound as in the prospects coming in. Whereas if you're going to go with outbound, you might say, specifically, I want these profiles of customers. I want to go after them. And then once you do it, then you might hear things like lead scoring, right? So you do prospecting, but not every prospect has the potential to become a customer. In the past, not in the past, even in some very old school businesses right now, not all prospects will have the potential to become customers. So you have to go through particular ways of screening them. So when we were there, we were taught techniques like BANT, B-A-N-T. So that's the prospect that we're talking to. Do they have the budget? Am I talking to the person with the right authority? The need, do they have the need for it? And the T would be, what is the time frame for doing business, right? We would do these kind of things. And now, because of the fact that you could afford to do it as a salesperson, because at one point in time, when I'm doing a cold calling, I can only talk to one customer, right? I'm talking to only one prospect. Whereas what's happening right now is because marketing is generating leads, the reach is going to be a lot more. So you're going to have more leads coming in than what the salespeople can handle. So suddenly what happens then is you need to have these kind of lead scoring methods. And for those of you who have tried to download a report or something for free, you would have probably seen things like, hey, wait a minute. I have to fill out the information about myself, my company, what my company is doing, what position I have. You're actually contributing to kind of lead scoring to say, if I have 1,000 leads, which leads should I prioritize? It's a long-winded answer, but I've actually told you a little bit about prospecting as well
No,
as what do you
this is
do.
no, this is great.
Mm,
I'm going to share my screen now because I took
mm,
notes. And tell me when you can see my screen.
mm.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I took notes here to the best I
Mm,
can. And even when I was back in college, I was not one of those people who was very good with taking notes. I had to actually rely
yeah.
on other friends to doing it. So I'm doing,
Huh,
the tool generates a transcript, but I still want to capture these
mm,
notes here as you go, Deva, because that way I can ask follow-up questions around these topics, right?
yeah,
So I think I've captured the gist of, there's a lot of things that
sure.
you mentioned here. I've captured the gist of it, but I want to go, I want to take that example that I was going to take a manufactured example
Mm,
and sort of walk through the process of doing this, and maybe we get to the end of that example in this call or the subsequent ones. It doesn't matter, but we're going to just kick off right now in this
mm,
session. But
mm,
before I go to that example, I just want to sort of recap what you've mentioned in the last 5 minutes, right? A lot of important points here. And tell me where I missed the mark, or feel free to
mm,
correct me, right? One of the things you mentioned was how prospecting has changed. Uh, from starting when your career started just about the same time as mine, and where we are at today, things have changed quite a bit. So one of the first things is, how has prospecting changed? So we talked, you mentioned that. The next thing is, you talked about the financial crisis, and you talked about how customers decided that they wanted to take more control over proceedings. So they were not caught unaware when before you reached out to them. So they were reasonably educated. I want to come back to that because I have some questions there, but that's kind of what you said there. And then you went on to talk about digital marketing playing a role in generating leads. Now, before I go to the rest of the bullet points here, Deva, would I, like at the highest level, I may have asked this earlier as well. As a layman, can I take the difference between advertising and marketing as marketing is when you're building long-term relationships, perhaps through content writing, perhaps through however you do it, you're trying to build a long-term relationship. Whereas sales is you're trying to actually say, hey, Deva is a professor who might benefit from what I'm actually selling today, and I want to get on the call with Deva and close the deal, which means it's very short term in that sense. Is that a fair way of looking at the differences?
I think the fact is, well, at least in marketing for the longest time, that's what we say. It's always a little bit cheaper to hold on to your existing client than trying to bring a new one in. By that yardstick, the job of both marketing and sales is to have sustainable here is I'm talking about repeat business with clients. So this idea of it could be that marketing is long-term focused and sales is short-term focused, I think you should be very careful. Let's talk about advertising, right? So essentially one of the things you talk about is what is the purpose of advertising is to get somebody interested in what it is that you have to sell. But in the advertising, you're also setting up the expectations of a client, right? How is that any different from a salesperson going in, is except that advertising is one to many. You have one company reaching out to a lot of people. Sales is just one-on-one, right? In fact, advertising in some instances might lead to more wrong expectations created than a salesperson who actually says, tell me about your problems and tell me how I can actually fix it, right? So
Okay.
essentially from that viewpoint, the role of every marketing activity is with the idea of building relationships, right? And the job of a salesperson is to start that process with a potential customer. That is, hey, we have done a marketing campaign, but the marketing campaign could be using feedback from my past customers, correct?
Right.
Or it could be fit from other customers just like you. So, in my opinion, I am saying this because there's a lot of negative connotation about sales, that sales are people are too short-term focused. But if I'm a salesperson, why would I go for a short-term win when I know that if I bring the customer in right, that customer is going to give me a lot of repeat business in the future when I could be taking my time to go bring other customers, right? So
Okay.
from that viewpoint, that's the way we should be looking at things, that together as an organization, let's take a look at all the tools that we have and how are we going to go out there and build those relationships with our clients. Now, you don't need to necessarily build a relationship with all your clients, because there are some customers who will say, I'm just a one-off customer. That's a topic for another day. But the idea is, in today's day and age, even if it's a one-off customer, if you set the wrong expectations and they're not happy, they're going to take to social media. So, and they're going to diss your company. So essentially, I think whatever we do, every touch point we have with a client, be it one-on-one as a person or through messaging that we have, one to many, we have to look at it as an opportunity to try and manage the expectations of our customers so that the customers, when they do come and work with us and we're able to deliver on the value, they'll continue to be with us for a long time.
So what you're saying is, it's not necessarily the case that sales is short term and marketing is long term, even though it's
Ah,
sometimes perceived that way. You're saying sales should also be for the long
yeah,
term.
indeed.
Okay.
That's my thought. That's again, that's my view on it, and that's what I've been saying for a long time, because people always think sales is too short-term focused. And the fact is that why would I want to invest so much time in getting a customer for once when actually if I do it well, I can have that customer for a long time. And if my commissions or my bonuses is based on the revenue that I bring in, it would make more sense for me to keep a customer happy because I could take the time saved in looking for new customers and make money.
Fair point, right? Like whether you're bringing that extra dollar by an existing customer buying more of what you're selling, or you're bringing in a new
Yeah.
customer. Sure, there are differences and nuances there, but no, I get your point, right? So continue
And yeah,
to. Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Yep. So going through this list, you mentioned inbound and outbound.
Mhm.
So for folks, again, I'm going to take a stab at this and correct me if I'm wrong. For folks who may or may not understand that terminology, outbound is you reaching out. Let's say me as Snowpal trying to sell something, me reaching out
Yeah.
to Deva is outbound.
Mm.
But if Deva stumbled into a marketing campaign or maybe something we wrote and you took an interest in Snowpal's products and you reached out to us, that's inbound. Is that
Indeed, right?
correct?
That's my take on this. There are people who say that even if I reach out to somebody particular, say for example, I need Krish from Snowpal to be buying my product, for example, right? So essentially what's going to happen is I am going to go after Krish with an email. I call it outbound because my messaging is specifically personalized to Krish, right?
Okay.
But there are people who say that's an email campaign. Email campaign is inbound because in my email campaign, in my email to Krish, I might say, hey, Krish, if you're interested in my products, click on this link.
Okay.
When Krish clicks on that link, let's say you're directed to a website or a webinar.
Right.
Now, if it's a big organization, the person who sends the email campaign is different from the person who's managing your website or is running a webinar campaign. So they are going to assume that Krish coming to my website is Krish from the ether. Does it make sense?
No,
They
it
don't
makes complete
realize
sense. Yeah.
it's not that they are not stopping to think, wait a minute, Krish went to an email that Deva had sent, and Deva is my colleague, but they're going to assume that it's Krish is coming from the ether based on the marketing content that they have put there. So you have all these people being nitpicky about it, right? But if we have to go purely with the definition of outbound, outbound is I am going after somebody.
Correct. And then inbound. So you're saying there's a variation there because even though I sent an email to Deva to say, hey, Deva, I'm selling an API at Snowpal. Do you like to purchase it? Right? Or purchase a
Mm,
subscription or license. You looked at it at a certain point of time asynchronously. You clicked the link in that email. It took you to a different place and you probably got in touch with somebody else. Now, there could be something in that email, like we have a token or a query string param, something of that nature, which can tell us that you were
mm.
redirected by our outbound, but you're
Yeah,
saying that could also be considered inbound, right?
that's why many people, when they say, when you take a look at, all you have to do for your audiences, if you want to say what's inbound, what is outbound, just go to one of these Chat GPT, Bing GPT, or Bard, or what is it, Claude. Is it Claude? Or one of those things, right?
One, yeah,
And
no,
you
I
go,
get it. Yep.
yeah, just go in there and say, what is inbound marketing or what is outbound marketing? And you're going to get a lot of information. So instead of even, you can even be lazy. That is, you not even have to go to Google and look for it specifically. You can just say, hey, open Chat GPT, whatever it is, just tell me all the outbound or inbound marketing techniques.
And how do I, between these two, right, Deva, how do I approach them differently? In other words, let's say uh, fundamentally, when I reach out to you to sell you something, I have to take a set of an approach. I have to have an approach in mind.
Mm,
But forgetting the nuance between it being implicitly inbound in this case, let's take the very obvious difference between the two, which is
mm,
me reaching out to you and you finding about
yeah.
Snowpal through some other information you found
Mm.
somewhere, you reaching out to us. What are some of the initial steps in your mind, and what are some of the fundamental differences in how a sales team should handle this outbound versus inbound?
Indeed, right? See, the first and foremost thing is, outbound is going to be when I reach out to you with a specific message that I have to customize it a little bit more than if it is inbound. Because inbound, I do not know who I'm going to get. I could get Krish, I could get Krish's best friend, I could get a bunch of companies out there. I do not know. I cannot target my messaging according to that. So my messaging could be a little bit more general. Whereas in outbound, which way? Face-to-face selling or selling on Zoom is another way of outbound, right? where specifically I can tailor my content a little bit or my message a little bit more according to who you are. Now, this does not mean that it happens all the time. So there are people who just buy a list and literally they'll put it on Excel, and then essentially what they'll do, they'll do a mail merge, and then literally they'll be sending out an email with the same message. Yeah? That's again, that's also done. That's not a best practice, but it's still outbound, right? But the purpose of outbound is to have much more targeted messaging that will appeal to the people. It's also something where outbound, because it's more expensive, outbound is done more when I know what specific customer I really want in my portfolio. So the messaging has to be different. But inbound or outbound, if there is content about your products, content about your services, content about your offering, right? More or less, content is vital, whether it's inbound or outbound. You need to have good content. Now, the level of customization might vary. So you might have heard of things like persona-driven marketing. Persona-driven marketing is, for example, if I'm selling my services, depending upon the size of your customer, if you have, at the last time in the last conversation, we talked about it. It doesn't mean that if I talk to a client and you could have a technical person in the client's organization, you could have a person who's in charge of IT, you could have a person who's in charge of paying and legal, for example. It doesn't mean that you need to have four people. It could be the same person with different hats. But so you could, for each persona, you need to create content, and that could be on your website. Or it could also be when I am reaching out saying, hey, but when I'm reaching out, I am going to say, if I'm going to send an email to Krish and Krish is the owner, my messaging to Krish will be different rather than when Krish comes to my website, at which point in time I have to ask Krish the question, what is your role? Right? So essentially that's the slight difference that you'll find.
Okay, so to add to ask you something related to what you just said, is there a different role involved there? Meaning, when I'm doing outbound, I'm a salesperson. I
Mm,
wear the hat of a salesperson, even if I'm not a full time salesperson, but regardless, I'm a salesperson. When it comes to inbound, that inbound is facilitated not necessarily by salespeople, but by marketing teams that have done whatever it is they needed to do to.
well, yeah, indeed, it's a great point. But the question is, it is done by marketing, but the explicit role of that is to generate leads for the sales organization. Otherwise, marketing is just a cost center. In traditional business to business, if you talk again, it depends upon company to company. If you go to traditional, hardcore, old school B2B companies that sell products, marketing, B2B marketing is still seen as marcom, marketing communication, creating websites. And these are just some things that it does, right? Whereas if you take a look at companies in which are more selling SaaS and the more modern companies, marketing has a ops role, marketing operations role, where you run campaigns and your campaigns are supposed to be bringing in leads, and you would have KPIs like cost per lead, cost per click, all that kind of stuff that you talk about, because your ultimate aim is for all the money that I put into these marketing expenditure, how many leads am I generating?
So does it mean, Deva, which means if the way you measure the success of a salesperson is by, let's say you're closing a deal, you're doing outbound reaches and whatever the metrics are. Do you assess the success of a marketing campaign by the number of inbounds that it brings to the table?
Okay, well, indeed. So essentially, well, but that's again, how long do we actually have? Because that's something that you have to. You see, generating a lead is one aspect. The next thing, of course, is for the if I'm doing marketing campaigns, I might end up generating a lot more leads because a salesperson can only do so many calls in a day or can visit so many clients in a day. Whereas if I'm running a marketing campaign, and I can even, if it's something that I'm providing, which is like a product that is on the cloud, I can even reach customers in the other part of the globe, right? So I could be generating more leads. And then when I generate the leads, now the question is, let's say, for example, I generate 1,000 leads and I have around 4 or 5 people in sales, out of which two of them, for whatever reasons, are in the office all the time, and their job is mostly screening. 1,000 is a lot. So essentially, what's going to happen is that we need to have some kind of way to narrow this down. When you do that, you're doing the job of a salesperson, except that you have a role as a marketeer. So marketing increasingly is going to go not just with the leads, but the number of qualified leads. That is, leads where you do some kind of pre-qualification with things like BANT, budget, authority, need, time frame. So you could just say what is going to be the cost per qualified lead, if it's possible as well. So then you're actually doing part of what salespeople do.
So which means when you have the inbounds coming in, who's that person? I understood sales as a team, marketing as a
Sure.
team. Who does the filtering of those leads?
Two things. Depending upon the kind of organization. So here I cannot generalize, but I can tell you some things that we hear, right? Depending upon the sheer number of leads coming in, you could the first round of what can I say? First round of weeding through the whole process would be what we say is you can automatically do it through lead scoring. Lead scoring, I suggest your audience just again go to OpenAI and things like that and say what lead scoring is. Lead scoring is actually a kind of approach by marketing to do an initial pre-screening of the leads to pre-qualify them, right? So essentially what they would do, remember I said budget and authority. So what will happen is when somebody comes to your website, before they can download your product brochure, you will kind of say, okay, tell me a little bit more about your job, your title, how big is your company? What are you trying to do? How big is your company is a proxy for budget. What is your function? So if I'm a vice president of of IT as against a manager of IT, so then marketing is trained to say a vice president is more likely to have decision-making powers rather than a manager of IT, right?
Okay.
And so essentially what you do, you assign a point. So you're actually doing what a salesperson would do, but you assign a point. So based on the forms filled out, you're kind of pre-assessing whether this is the right profile. So if I have 1,000 leads, without even picking up the phone and calling, I can automate this process. And that's where you see this is lead automation. It's automated lead scoring, and that's what you do. And then you come up with a list, a shorter list of leads. Then in many companies, especially in SaaS companies now, these leads are then further fed to like inside SDRs, BDRs.
Hey Deva, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. I'm going to continue drawing here as you talk. Can you see my screen?
yeah, I can see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Okay, I'm going to just interrupt you for a moment there, right? Just to
Yeah,
follow through here. So we started with sales, and I want to just draw a couple of, and I use basic shapes because I don't understand anything beyond the most basic of shapes. So
yeah, yeah,
bear with me here. So
yeah.
sales, and then we talked about outbound, and then I'm going to say, I want to copy this. I want to make it inbound here. Okay. Uh, let's say at the highest level, outbound and inbound. Now, when I go to
Look,
outbound, you meant, sorry?
the arrow should be the other way around. Outbound and
Oh,
inbound should
my
lead to
bad. Yep,
sales.
yep. My bad. Thank you.
Unless it's instead of sales, you put that as marketing. I mean, as I said, you still have very, very traditional old school companies where marketing does not do any lead generation. It's sales that goes and does cold calling.
But Deva, sorry, say that statement again. But it's always a combination, I presume, right? That you're going to have sales to do the outbound and marketing that
Not
facilitates in the
always.
inbounds coming in.
It depends upon the industry you're in and the company that you're in. So it's not always. Outbound is always even outbound is not necessarily in some companies it can be email campaigns, but most of the time it's sometimes outbound could just be salespeople going and calling on clients.
Okay, so let me jot that down here. So outbound could be, you said sales campaigns, right?
Normally we say sales campaigns or marketing campaigns. Well, you even have sales campaigns. What do I mean by sales campaigns? But that's traditional old school. You would say, okay, I want to go. You're based in Washington D.C., right?
Right.
Yeah. If I want to go to Washington D.C., so what am I going to do? In old school sales, that is where you would call it. The term is called blitzing. Blitzing would be I would call all the salespeople from across the United States to come to the Washington, D.C. area, and you would go and canvass as many potential customers as possible physically, maybe generate leads, qualify them, and then hand it over to the sales rep who's responsible for Washington, D.C. Does it make sense?
No, Deva, sorry, say that again one more time, please.
Yeah. So, for example, I've created this. I'm a nationwide. I'm a US wide organization, and essentially what I want to do is that I'm going to run a sales campaign. A sales campaign is where I want to go in and say I want to generate as many leads in Washington, D.C. But Krish is a salesperson whose territory is Washington, D.C. But Krish does not have the time to go and visit all the potential customers. So what they do, they would come up and they'll say, okay, let's bring in all the salespeople from around the US. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to go out there and we are going to call on and canvas as many potential customers as possible.
Okay.
And then I would take all those potentially interested customers, and then I would hand it over to Krish and I would go back to my territory. Does it make sense?
Right. Okay. Yep.
That's called blitzing. And then what's going to happen? Let's say after that you want to go to Tucson in Arizona, but Krish is mostly based in Washington. But Krish is going to say, wait, the last time we needed to generate leads here, the guy from Tucson or the girl from Tucson came over and helped me canvas here. So I'm going to go over there and help them do that. That's very old school. It's blitzing, very expensive,
I can
right?
see, right? It just sounds expensive.
It sounds expensive, but as I said, it depends upon what I'm selling. So, for example, today I had a speaker in my class, and they sell big windmills and wind turbines, where sales cycle times, that is the amount of time it takes for you to make a deal, might be anywhere between a year and a half to 2 years. The number of customers you're going to have, or potential customers, are going to be a lot less than if I'm selling a CRM system, which is mostly targeting small and medium businesses, or let's say, for example, less than 10 employees. Then the sheer number, volume of potential customers is a lot more for the second option than for wind turbines, right?
Mm.
So I need to know my business to see what is the best way of reaching out. So there's no one size fits all.
Yep. Okay. Got it. Okay. Now, when you go to the second one, so outbound is we said sales campaigns and then cold calling.
Yeah.
Uh, is cold calling, we are in 2024, and I'm like 2 months, if that, into the world of sales, since we launched our B2B products towards the latter part of last year. So I could be super wrong here. But if I told you and or asked you, Deva, is cold calling dead in 2024, or is it still alive?
Cold calling still happens. In fact, what you do is that cold calling sometimes happens in a combination of many things. For example, you could have one situation where you could say somebody visited my website, did not leave anything behind, but I can track it. I can see which company they're working for. Then I can pick up the phone and call them as well. So cold calling is not completely dead, but a lot of young people don't like doing cold calling.
Still alive. Not everyone likes
I,
to do
I,
this.
yeah, usually I call it lukewarm calling. That it's easy for me to convince a person to pick up the phone and call a potential customer or a potential prospect who has visited my website because they've already shown an interest.
Okay. Maybe they already showed an interest. But if they did not show an interest, is it still a feasible, viable model today, Deva, to
Yeah, I
try
mean,
and sell what you have through cold calling?
I cannot necessarily answer that because, again, as I said, one of the things you'll never get a straight answer from is from either a consultant or an academic. So it all depends upon your situation, what your company is, and everything else. So I
Wait,
think
let me ask you
that.
this, right? Sorry to
Hmm,
interrupt, but let me ask you
no,
this.
no.
If there is an example, because if you asked me, Krish, would you ever want to have a relationship with somebody who called you, who cold called you? I don't
Hmm.
know. My answer might very well be maybe not so much, because I cannot think of a situation where, I wanted, how many of us actually genuinely like to attend to these cold calls. So, I mean, if you were to take an example, even if it's exaggerated or preposterous, would you know of an example, Deva, where cold calling actually, in a certain scenario, maybe an industry, maybe a demographic, where cold calling has a higher chance of working than in other cases?
The fact is that at the end of the day, today's day and age is, again, Is something really a cold call? It depends, because at the end of the day is I would only pick up the phone and do a cold call if I feel that the individual or the company I'm calling can truly benefit from the solution that I have to make. And now I'm only talking about cold calling in a business to business scenario. I'm not talking about telemarketing calling you for trying to sell you like a telephone subscription or
Right.
things like that. There, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question, right? But if I genuinely have a solution and if I ask the right questions, I might trigger the person I'm talking to, because you never know exactly what situation is happening with a particular individual in a particular company, right? And then it becomes vital about how you actually spend the initial seconds or a minute in trying to get the attention of the person that you're talking to as well. And it's not that that cold call is going to result in the customer buying from you. Because let's face it, at the end of the day is in a typical business to business, we're talking about a long-term sales process. There's no way that you're going to make a deal in the first call. The question is, can I get the hook in? Can I get it in enough for me to go in and do an in-depth needs analysis?
Correct.
And then let me do that. So essentially, no customers, in my opinion, right? Unless you're working for a very, 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 very well-known organization and the customer has a requirement that needs no customization, and the customer was just about to pick up the phone and call you anyway.
Perfect. Actually, I'm going to add to what you just said after drawing one more thing. Should we also add cold emailing into this
Yeah, but
diagram?
for me, is that cold emailing again, as I said, is cold emailing is I think the factor that how many times you just have to go to LinkedIn once in a while to see how many people complain about the fact that hey, we had a guy or a girl who connected to us on LinkedIn, and then immediately after that, once you say connect, they send you a solicitation email, right? I think those kind of things are gone. It will not work anymore. There has to be a context, there has to be some way of getting the attention, and there genuinely has to have something that gets the attention of the person who says, okay, let me give 5 or 10 minutes to see what these people are talking about. And here, if there's a difference between if I am an unknown company calling you as against a Salesforce, for example, a sales rep from Salesforce calling you, there is
Right.
something to be said for that.
Okay, so two things, right? You mentioned LinkedIn, but I want to separate those two out, if that makes sense, right? So I want to separate cold emailing from, I'm going to call it LinkedIn prospecting. But before we go to LinkedIn prospecting, I actually want to, hopefully that the font is not too small there. You know, the tool does it when you add a few more characters. With cold emailing, some differences between cold calling and emailing. As you know, at Snowpile, when we reach out, we are very careful about who we are doing the reach out to,
Um,
do a lot of due diligence. It's not like we are, I want to touch upon a few items that you had mentioned earlier, just for everyone's benefit as well. You mentioned the purchasing a list. I've actually read about that online. They were where you can purchase a list.
yeah,
Uh, and I don't know how this tool does it. Like when I'm sharing my screen, Deva, can you still see me or can you?
no, I can see you as a small, because I'm talking on my phone, I see you in a
Okay,
very
cool.
small
Yep.
thumbnail on
But
the left. Yeah,
But if you want me to stop sharing while you want to talk, just
that's
let
fine.
me know. I can do that
Yeah,
as well.
sure,
Yeah.
that's fine.
So essentially, going back to, sorry, I was just trying to. I think I lost my train of thought there. I was asking you, what was I asking you?
You were
Uh,
talking about cold emailing and LinkedIn messaging, I think.
Yep, LinkedIn messaging. So I think I had, I'll probably come back to it in a second. So, yeah, mailing list, sorry, the mailing
Yeah.
list. I was talking about purchasing a mailing list.
Mm,
We've never done that. And
mm,
I wouldn't have recommended anybody do that. But since you mentioned it, uh, there are many things involved there, correct? One is the quality of the
ah,
data in that list.
mm,
Two is, I don't know what, to be honest with you, if you, even in Outbound, if I looked up Deva's a professor, Deva has done so many things in his
mm,
career, and I figure out maybe he is the right person for me to be selling something that I'm selling
mm,
to. When I get this list from somebody, I don't know how that list was curated to begin with.
Yeah.
Uh, right. So I don't know if the quality of the data in that list, the emails, how current and accurate they are.
Ah,
And then you're going to end up in a situation likely where you put it through an automation tool, and then 99% of these emails bounce. It's going to hurt your email reputation, and then none of your emails ever get sent out from your domain. So there's a lot of
yeah. Yeah.
repercussions to it. So in again, just like cold calling, as we enter this year, even if we took specific examples of B2B sales and software sales, should what are your thoughts on somebody who's unsure about whether or not I should purchase a mailing list that somebody is selling?
Well, it all depends upon what your objectives are, Krish, because at the end of the day is uh, at some point in time, of course, there are some lists from companies that tend to be a lot more reliable than others, right? Then that is something that you can do. You can then do that with ways of cross-referencing and looking at tools like Zoom Info or things like that, and actually say, okay, a combination of Zoom Info, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and all of these together can say, okay, this is the kind of person, and he or she or they are still working in that organization. You still cannot guess whether they have a need for your product or not. That's number one. You can also not necessarily say that for the particular product, it looks like my past experiences, the IT vice president was the one who made a decision. So essentially, I'm going to focus on everybody with the title of IT vice president. It also depends upon in some company where the IT vice president might just be a glorified name. It could just be a manager. You have so many things going out there that you have to at some point in time do a trade-off between, okay, what are my objectives? Can I achieve my objectives with being super selective and then making sure that maybe I may not reach out to enough? Or where is it I draw the line where I am going to take some chances? This is my take on it. So that's what I would do as well. And you would also have past history too, right? You do experimentation as well, right? You say, okay, I'm going to experiment for some, I'm going to buy it for 1 month, I'm going to do it in one particular way. Another month, I'm going to use this particular method. I'm going to try one where I send a message in the morning. I'm going to try one where I'm going to send the message in the afternoon. You know what I mean? I might do a lot of A/B testing and to see what works best. Mostly the marketing folks are more, I mean, the marketing operations folks, or what nowadays you also hear terms like RevOps, revenue operations folks as well. So essentially, you'll see them as well. They might be a lot more suitable for answering those questions. Because for me, that's still an area where I'm beginning to even understand how that works. Because I'm still at the companies that I work with are still old school sales.
Okay, perfect. And then does it also mean it depends on the, can I say that for a small organization, and I'll give you more context to that as to why I'm asking the question. Can I say that for a smaller organization, as a startup, software startup that's reaching out, here's at least to give you context to that question actually. A couple of months ago, as a team of engineers who've built software all our lives, but never actually have done the job of whether it's picking up a call, which we still cannot do, or even
Mm.
sending an email is actually
Yeah.
it's not something that comes naturally to us. But we were told these things, and I'm understanding this a little bit more as I'm talking to people like such as yourself who are in the field of doing this for many years with a lot of experience, and plus me doing it in the last 2 months as well. Automation, and we talked about cold calling and email. I want to tie in automation there to some extent, even though that's a separate topic altogether. I purchased a list and I'm trying to send this. Now, as a small company, uh, is that even a wrong starting point? Because if I'm a large
Mm.
organization, maybe I need a lot of people to reach out to. But as a small company, I honestly may not even want to reach out to like tens or hundreds of
Agree, right?
people.
Yeah. Then you can about this is my take on depending upon how much time you have and how many customers you want to reach out to. So first of all, you need to have some sort of an idea about what is your hit rate, right? So for example, for every 100 leads that I generate, maybe I'm able to convert 5 or 10. So which then means that are 5 or 10 customers enough for me? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. If the answer is yes, then of course, if I need to generate 100 leads, it's quite different from having to generate 1,000 leads, because out of 1,000 leads, if I convert them to five, essentially it means that you need to have a broader reach.
You know what, Deva? I
So,
want to
yeah.
while you speak to it, I actually want to draw this out because this is something that I have learned, trying to learn the hard way, if you will. So what I'm going to do before we get back, we're going to come back to the rest of this diagram with the prospecting and inbounds and whatnot. I want to just take one more thing here. Let me draw a circle. I'm going to say maybe a different color. Okay, let me go with that. Maybe okay, not even fill it. Okay, I'm going to say sales uh, uh, reach outs or something like that. I'm using it. Using an informal term there. I'm going to start with a number. Let's say I want to denote this in terms of the size of these circles, if you will. So I'm going to start out. Let's say I start with 100 people, right? I'm going to send this to. Oops, I'm gonna draw this circle here. Tool is being a little bit flaky today. Okay, let's say I take this, let's assume that I'm going to reach out to 100 people, correct? I'm going to start with 100 people. From my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the numbers, if I'm sending an email to 100 people, uh, even the open rate for B2B sales, from my experience, Deva, in the last month or two, has been that it hovers around like 15 to
Yeah.
18%, right?
Okay.
Is that a
Yeah.
fair number?
No, again, as I said, Krish, the fact is that again depends upon the industry that you're in, right?
Okay.
And what you're saying as well. So for me is that then it's very specific to the industry that you're in. But what you need to understand is that let's say 15%. The question is, if I were to send the same in the next month and to another 100 people, the question is, do I get the same 15%? Then that sort of gives you an idea about your industry and the kind
Correct.
of customer that's pretty much what you actually have to test and see as well, huh?
Right. No, no, correct. No, but I'm just going to go with, I know
Sure.
these are not, this is not empirical data. I'm trying to
Yeah, yeah.
draw this to help people understand what I did not know like 2 months ago. Where you're thinking, hey, I'm going to send 100 emails out. I was like, you know what? 96 people are going to surely respond to me, right? I'm
Yeah.
exaggerating. I didn't think it was
Yeah.
96,
No.
but I thought it was a lot higher number. But I want to just give some perspective to see, okay, that's nowhere close to what you're actually going to get. So my experience, and you tell me if this is if it's insane or if it's reasonable. My expectation, open rate has been about 15%, right?
Mm.
So we are talking about 15 emails even being opened once.
Yeah.
Uh, and I, from what I'm reading, that's not a terribly unusual number, right? It sounds like
It could
that's
be.
kind of what you can expect in the industry.
But the question for you in your industry could be that depends. You can buy information on that because anytime I buy a list, I can ask them what is the industry success rate or open rate or things like that. Huh? You can ask them and ask the supplier who's doing this to prove that this is the case. Of course, they're going to come back and say, well, the open rate depends upon how catchy your message is and all that kind of stuff, right? So you're going to have all that coming, all those factors coming in. What are the kind of messaging you also have to take into consideration? 15 emails are open, but should we try and see when did they open it? You know what I mean? When did they open it? Did they open it much more in the afternoons? Did they open it in the mornings? Or when I had a lot of content in it, did they open it? You know what I'm saying? So there's so many things about message effectiveness there too. So that, as I said, I am not as qualified to answer that because now we are going into the realm of how good are my marketing and messaging campaigns, which usually in many companies, salespeople are, again, it depends, right? Increasingly in some companies, they do have these people and you can actually work on how to send these messaging and stuff like that. We increasingly do train our students on sales where if they say if you're going to be sending a message, this is what you do. But those are not these kind of mass emails. Those are very specific emails that I write to a potential. That is, I have these 15 people who opened, and for those 15 people, this is how I would have to send a message, right?
No,
You're not
got
going
it.
to send it to the, that's pretty much
Makes
it.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So going with this, just to no, perfect. We'll come back to each of these. As we progress our conversations, my idea is to come back to each of these circles and shapes and dig as
Yeah.
deep as we can in these
But
areas.
but I have a stop in 5 minutes. Sorry, Krish. So it's
Yeah, no
rather
worries.
late. Yeah, yeah. But we can pick it up in the next call. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
No, no problem. Okay. So we have 5 more minutes to go. I'm going to continue this diagram a bit
Sure.
further. Uh, I've seen in these open rates also, I'm just choosing different colors
Hmm.
here. Uh,
Hmm.
people have seen the email more. Oh, this is too light. People have seen the email like more than once.
Mhm.
That number drops even further, right? So the open rate of
Yeah.
15 emails is people seeing the email. So I'm going to say seeing email once, and then if I go continue, uh, folks who see email more than once, this number drops even further. I want to say this is about 2 to 4%, if that. It just
Yeah.
depends. So,
Indeed, right? Because that again, as I said, for the audience, that 2 to 8, it's very, very industry product who you're targeting specific.
no, absolutely. No question about it. It's specific to the industry that the timing, like you said, number of factors play a role. But I want to actually, share these numbers as practical examples of an industry that, for instance, we've been sending some emails
Yeah.
in the last 2 months
Mm,
or so. So these are not manufactured numbers. These are just, I'm
mm,
sharing some real numbers here. And the reason I'm trying to share these numbers is I don't know what expectations you go with as somebody who's, creating a company, who's not in the business of sales necessarily. But as we spoke in the last podcast, all of us have to do some element of sales, even whether or not we're
mm.
interacting with the customers. So we start with 100 emails, and we're down with 2 people actually looking at email more than once, which means the 98 other people, uh, of course, 85 people never even opened the email because it probably ended up in the spam or junk folder.
Mm.
And then the 15 who saw it once, a smaller percentage saw it more than once. And now you've come to a smaller number, which is 2 to 4%, which is literally for every 100 emails, you're talking 2 people taking the time to actually seeing your email more than once. I know
Indeed,
we're
right?
nearing the end of this
Yeah, yeah.
podcast, but I want to at least, just do a quick, recap. But before I take up the time in doing the recap, Deva, I just want to draw, just if it makes sense, draw these circles up and put these numbers down so we can see what it means. I know none of these are concrete numbers because it changes by the industry, by the timing, and a whole lot. But I want to take the liberty of making some assumptions. That way, we can say, okay, what, even if you made a certain set of assumptions about certain industries, what are you looking at? And how can you actually come up with a campaign that makes sense, assuming these assumptions are actually more or less accurate to begin with? Because that's one way to get to some sort of an answer. Because I know if I had those things 2 months ago, we had those things as a company, we would have done fewer mistakes than we actually have done in the last 2 months. And I'm quite sure that this is quite the case with a lot of the people who are engineering founders who don't have a whole lot of insights into sales and marketing getting in this space. That's the idea. But in terms of this session, what would be your closing comments with the conversations we've had here?
Essentially, the fact is that understand that the world of how to reach out to customers is constantly evolving with technology coming up right now. I think the fact is that if you have a marketing department, do understand that marketing operations, which is Markov's running a marketing campaign, an email campaign, and understand the dynamics of what it is, the making sure that you experiment initially to see what kind of messaging at what time of the day, what modes of communication is actually going to work is going to be very, very critical in terms of saying this is what we're going to do to try and prospect. And if you do get the people to open it, make sure that your content is spot on, because even if you the amount of money that you spend on that list and paying for that subscription to that marketing automation software, if you're able to convert one or two customers into paying customers, right? Depending upon how much you do and how
Right.
much they pay and what's about your service. That's one customer that you would have to go on to 5 or 6 customers as cold calling. You would have had to pay a salesperson to go do that, or even pick up the phone and call and run the risk of that person doing a good job on that call just to set up an appointment for you to go see them face to face. So you need to be looking at it from that perspective to try and see how do I justify the spend that I have on this. So 2 to 4 might seem very low, but if that gets converted into a client, then that's fantastic. It's going to pay off for everything else in
Absolutely.
terms of that, right? And essentially, what you're going to do, that you're going to say, wait a minute, what? When we did that, one of the things I would always suggest is, if you're able to convert one that opened that email, the question you have to ask yourself, why did they open the email? What do they find interesting? So that if I have that, I can go back and try to replicate it. And that's essentially what I would think about as well.
And I want to get to the thanks for that. The closing
Hmm.
comments. I want to get to the example, but I had a feeling I wouldn't even get the example started. So in the next session, I want to take an example, a very
Hmm.
manufactured example, not necessarily related to what we
Eh,
do. Actually, it wouldn't be related to what we do, and go through a process. How do we set
mm.
up a campaign? What are the steps we take? If we took that manufactured example, and I think I have an example. Hopefully, you like that example, and then we can go through the process of going through these steps, so people watching it understand. Okay, you know what? Yep, this is how you would have done it for that manufactured example. Here is how I can extrapolate this and apply those learnings in a more pragmatic manner to what it is that I'm actually doing.
With the caveat that I am not exactly a marketing operations specialist. So I will reason along with you,
Absolutely.
right? I am more of a person where once I get in, how do I handle a conversation,
And we
right?
are on the same page there, exactly. No worries
Yeah,
at all.
fantastic. Then we're
Yeah,
good.
because the whole idea behind the podcast also, just I'm gonna end in 30 seconds. I take items and even technologies they were where I've never ever used them and I hit
Yeah.
record. So the idea is not necessarily that I'm familiar with that. It's just that the pain of you discovering and learning from it is actually as valuable, if not more, in my opinion,
Uh,
than the learning that actually comes out of it. Because you're bound to make these mistakes. It's like a cook who's a good chef who's making a dish. A good chef in my mind, and if I could take the liberty of saying that, is even as somebody who has no idea how to cook, is it's not always you get it right, but sometimes maybe the tomato is not exactly how you expected for it to be, and you're making this pasta sauce. But you have to make those adjustments to the tomato, it being ripe or not so ripe, and actually you make it work. Because
hmm.
if the tomatoes were all exactly ripe in the exact same level every single time, I don't know if you need to be the best of chefs to actually get the best pasta sauce. I think the better, at least the way I look at it is sometimes you have what you have, you don't have the perfect scenario. What do you make of the perfect scenario is what we want to go with. So that, at
And you
least
did.
that's my 2 cents.
And you also have one thing as well. If you look at cooking as a science, right? And there are a lot of Michelin star restaurants who would say it's almost a science, right? But science comes from experimentation. There's no way that you're going to have fusion cooking that worked the first time, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So, for example, if I say, okay, given globalization, given the fact that there's some kind of an idea about how some cultures cook certain foods with certain ingredients, now, in the past, when there was no technology, the idea would be that you would be stuck to the cuisine that you knew best, or it would be somebody that you came across. But now with technology, I can actually see, wait a minute, if that ingredients work with that combination, why can't it work if the ingredients and the chemicals behind it, if I understand that a little bit more, why would it not work in certain other combinations as well? So the question is keeping an open mind. It's the process that you have to be aware of. And in this case, the process is it is the sales process, it is the psychology of how people buy. You have that, and you say, okay, how do people buy in certain stages? Then I think you're going to go a long way.
It's not every day that I get the opportunity to talk to a professor of sales. So again, Dr. Rangarajan, Deva, as I call you,
It,
thank you very
Krish,
much for
thank you
taking
for
the
the,
time. This
yeah,
is podcast number 2 in our series. And the next one, I'm hoping to take an example and sort of
absolutely.
hit the ground running with that example.
Sounds
Um,
great.
Thanks, Deva.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye. Thanks for watching.